Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming along to hear this talk today. As Judith has just said, my name is Martin Hendry. I'm an astronomer from Glasgow University in Scotland in the UK, and I'm here to talk to you today about the topic, did we really land on the moon? Now, what I spend most of my time doing is studying very exotic and very bizarre objects like black holes and exploding stars. And for many years, as well as researching those fields, I've been doing outreach to schools and to the public on those areas of astronomy and astrophysics. But over many years, I was finding that as I give public talks or schools lectures on these themes, somebody would ask me, did I think we really landed on the moon? And I became quite fascinated why more than 40 years after the moon landings happened, why so many people were interested in that question and perhaps suspected that maybe it was all hoaxed and faked by NASA back in the 1960s. So what I'm here to tell you today is that I don't think it was faked. So I should lay my cards on the table and begin by saying there's a very short version of this talk which goes something like this, and then we can all go home. But in a way, the main point of why I'm here is to encourage you to think about it for yourself. And in fact, I've just taken on a new role within the UK's Science and Technology Facilities Council that funds all that research into black holes and gravity and cosmology, all the things I normally do. But what they're looking for me to do is to be a kind of ambassador for those areas of science which our Research Council funds. And really, in a way, what I'm looking to do in that position is just to get people thinking a bit more about how science works in the first place. Sure, we find out lots of cool things about the universe, and a bit like Judith was saying, 5 years from now we'll be finding things that no one's even thought of yet. So it's kind of hard to anticipate future developments in science. But the one thing we can point to is that the scientific method, the way in which we do science, hasn't really changed so much over a very long time. So what I'm going to encourage you to do in this short presentation is to think about the question, did we really land on the moon? I'm reaching an answer not just because of what I say, because I'm a professional scientist and I should know better, but instead I want to see what you think. And I'd like to encourage you all to really just have a little think about this question and see what conclusion you reach for yourself. So like I say, what got me into this was over many years people asking me the question and my recognizing that I didn't really know enough about it to offer much of a professional opinion. My gut feeling was that yes, we really did land in the moon because, it would have been impossible for NASA to pull off such an elaborate hoax. But there did seem to be people out there who were claiming the contrary. So I began to dig a little more into this and came across a documentary program which was casting serious doubt on whether this great adventure that took place in the late 1960s and early 1970s had really happened at all. So I want to begin by showing you a short extract from that documentary program. There's been several more like it, and to be fair, there's also been documentary programs that set out to rebut the evidence in the one I'm going to show. So I'm by no means doing this for the first time. There's plenty of people out there who've attracted some attention to this topic in the past. But nonetheless, it's an interesting one. I hope you'll find it so as well. And as I said, to begin, let's just take a brief look at a short extract from this Fox television program, Conspiracy Theory, Did We Really Go to the Moon?
The following program deals with a controversial subject. Tonight.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
That's one small step for man.
Man landing on the moon.
One giant leap for mankind.
But believe it or not, some people say it never happened.
This whole thing was a fake. The flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere.
During their 8-day voyage, the Apollo 11 astronauts saw spectacular views of the Earth, floated in a weightless environment, and supposedly went where no man had gone before.
They're looking good down and half.
Millions of people watched on television as the lunar lander touched down, and these unforgettable words were spoken.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
But even today, there are those who claim that believing in man's one small step requires one giant leap of faith.
I think it was an intuitive feeling that what was being shown was not real.
Casing observed that despite the clarity of deep space, the stars were missing from the black lunar sky. He saw the American flag waving, even though there is no air on the moon. And he discovered that there was no blast crater beneath the lunar lander. As outlandish as it might seem, it has been estimated that as many as 20% of Americans believe we never went to the moon.
So that's a lot of people. So just what exactly is lying behind these claims? Well, we heard some commentary there from Bill Casing, who in the 1970s was one of the chief protagonists of these moon hoax conspiracy theories. Another person around that same time, and indeed to the present day, is Bart Sibrel, who in the 1990s put together a DVD called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which very firmly put forward the notion that it was all filmed in some studio. And Bart Sibrel has achieved more recently infamy on the internet because there's a video clip which you could find on YouTube, which is where Bart Sibrel was going in search of some of the Apollo astronauts, in this instance Buzz Aldrin, who was the second person to land on the moon, and he was challenging the Apollo astronauts to swear on the Bible that they had really gone to the moon. And this is what happened when he tried to get Buzz Aldrin to do that.
We are cowards and a liar and a thief. Did you get that on camera?
That's maybe worth watching again. Bear in mind that Buzz Aldrin was in his late 70s at this time. He still packs a fairly mean left hook.
We are cowards and a liar and a thief. Did you get that on camera?
Much as I can understand Buzz Aldrin's reaction, I think as a scientist what I want to try and do is approach this in a more cool and calm and objective way. As my wife put it when I saw that Fox television documentary, once my blood pressure had returned to normal levels, what she recommended I should do was try and think of ways in which, through simple science experiments, we can test some of the ideas of the conspiracy theorists. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. There isn't time to go through all of them, but what I'm going to do at the end is give you a web address where I've put together a lot of resources, and I've worked with many schools in the UK to essentially carry this out as an extended science project over maybe a few months. So perhaps some of the school groups who are here today might wish to consider doing that for themselves in the future. So let's take a look at what I would regard as the kind of top 10 conspiracy theories, and we'll do our best to get through a selection of them in the time we have today. I think number one in the list is undoubtedly the waving flag, the fact that you see the flag waving in the video footage from the moon. It's the one which the conspiracy theorists say is the real chief piece of evidence in favour of it being fake. That's what they say anyway. They also point to the fact that there are no stars in the photographs, which in their view is suspicious because one should, as they put it, be able to see stars in the clarity of deep space. And then they point to, let's not advance quite so quickly, they point to some discrepancies in their opinion in the shadows in the photographs, the fact that the shadows don't appear parallel, which in their view is an indication that there are multiple light sources contributing to the photographs, and therefore in their view that means that it was filmed on Earth and not on the moon. They also point to the fact that the film of the astronauts, when played back at a faster rate, looks, in their opinion, as if it was being filmed on Earth, and therefore they conclude that what actually happened is it was filmed on Earth and then slowed down later to make it look as if it was on the moon. Then there's various other photographic anomalies, as they would have it. The fact that some of the crosshairs on the images, which according to NASA are on the lens of the camera, well, sometimes they actually appear behind things in the photographs, which they would claim is evidence that NASA were somehow tampering or doctoring the images. And then there's the fact that you can see detail in the astronaut's spacesuit even when they are standing in pools of shadow. And if, in their view, there is only one bright source of light, that is the sun, then the hoax theorists challenge the fact that you can see these details. They say that the astronauts should be standing in shadow, and therefore you shouldn't see those details on their spacesuit. Then there's various issues that they identify to do with the dust. The fact that, for example, you can still see well-formed footprints around the lunar module, which they claim would have been impossible because all the dust should be blown away, in their opinion, by the exhaust of the lunar module rocket engine. And that same rocket engine should, according to them, have produced a sizable blast crater beneath the lunar module. Then they also point to the radiation belts around the Earth, which they say, no pun intended, is a real piece of killer evidence in favour of the conspiracy theories, because they would say that the astronauts would never have survived the journey to the moon and the passage through those radiation belts. Then there's one or two further photographic anomalies. For example, the fact that you see the lunar module in some images and not in others, which appear to be taken from essentially an identical location. And this is puzzling to them because the lower stage of the lunar module actually stayed behind on the moon. And therefore, why is it missing from the photograph on the right? And related to that, as I said, the lower stage stayed behind. Well, the footage of the upper stage ascending from the moon, which NASA says filmed from the lunar rover, the little moon buggy that the astronauts had in the later missions, according to the hoax theorists, that looks suspicious too, because you don't see any fuel jet from the exhaust of the lunar module. So that's a little cross-section of some of the ideas. And I guess my experience has been that when people look at these 10 conspiracy theories, or maybe others that they've heard about or read about, then it's maybe quite understandable that they should have some doubts. And indeed, it's maybe worth pausing at this point to see whether anyone here is harbouring any suspicions that in the light of all of these conspiracy theories that perhaps the moon landings were faked. Anyone like to express a view? Do we have any doubters in the audience now after all those? Well, if everyone thinks the moon landings really happened, again, maybe we can all go home. But in the spirit of getting you to just think a bit more carefully about the question, let's take a look at one or two of them and see how I, as an astronomer, would encourage you to think about the science behind the hoax theory. So if we start with the waving flag, let's begin by seeing what the television show had to say about that one.
If there's no air or wind on the moon, why is this American flag waving?
The fact that the flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere means that there must have been a little blast of wind out in Area 51 where they shot this.
Could these questionable images simply be the result of astronauts struggling to plant the flag into the lunar surface? Or is there more going on than meets the eye?
I think it does tell you a lot about just how difficult it might be for someone confronted with these conspiracy theories to make up their mind on what they should believe and what they shouldn't believe. Because conspiracy theories come in many levels and many layers. And indeed, one of the best sites I've come across which debunks some of these moon hoax conspiracy theories is actually written by people who think that the real cover-up is that NASA discovered evidence of alien life on the moon, and that it suits NASA's purposes to have the moon hoax theorists as a distraction from those conspiracy theories. And indeed, the authors of those pages describe people like Bill Kaysing as the sort of people that give conspiracy theorists a bad name. So that's what you're confronted with. So basically my moral here is that the challenge of 21st century science is to be able to sift the information you find and separate the good science from the not so good science. So let's see if I can help you do that today. Let's have a think about what we would expect a waving flag to do on the moon where there is no atmosphere. Well, first of all, if we look at this video clip, we can see that the astronauts are planting the flag in the ground, and sure enough, it is indeed waving from side to side. If there's no atmosphere on the moon, we'd basically expect the flag to droop, to just sag and hang down the way a flag would on Earth on a windless day. Now, I think the PR people in NASA figured that that wouldn't look too good for the watching millions back home, so they designed the flag to have a rigid horizontal crossbar so that the flag would be extended. It would look better for the photographs. And moreover, the flag wasn't made of cloth, it was made of plastic with a semi-rigid ripple effect so that again it would look more photogenic for the cameras. But I think the real question here is, can the conspiracy theorists show me some video footage where the flag is flapping and yet the astronauts are off doing something else? Because the only footage I've ever seen where the flag is moving is when they're in the process of planting it in the ground, or they've just let go of the flagpole after planting it into the ground. So my scientific explanation for this one is that the reason the flag is flapping is because they're twisting the flagpole back and forth to plant it in the ground, and that sets up the motion of the flag itself. But don't take my word for it. Let's have a look at a little experiment that we constructed, short of going to the moon ourselves, to try and investigate that theory that I've just put forward. Would the flag flap on the moon where there's no atmosphere? But what we basically did was to pump the air out of the jar, or as much as we could without equipment. So when you see it saying 1/10 of atmospheric pressure, that's because we've pumped 90% of the air out of the jar. And what I'd like you to notice is that when most of the air is gone from the jar, the flag flaps many more times than it does when there's air in the jar. If you remove most of the air, you greatly reduce the friction. There's no air resistance. There's still some friction between the flag and the flagpole, so it does stop eventually, but it takes quite a bit longer than when there's air in the jar. So the curious thing about this, in my view, it actually argues that the waving flag, instead of being the chief piece of evidence in favour of the hoax theory, it's actually the best evidence we have that they really were on the moon. Because a flag on Earth in Area 51 or anywhere else simply wouldn't do what we see the flag doing. It wouldn't flap for as long because there would be air resistance to slow it down. Now, I wouldn't say that this proves that we really went to the moon, but I think it makes a serious dent in the chief argument of the conspiracy theorists, and in my view it's all because they haven't properly understood what a flag would do in a truly airless environment. You've got to think through the science, ideally construct a little experiment like we did, and see what you find. Conversely, for example, if you look at some footage of a flag where the astronauts aren't just planting it in the ground, in fact in this case they're on board their spaceship about to head off home, this is just the final seconds before Apollo 16 left the moon, and we can see that sure enough the flag does move as it's blasted by the exhaust from the upper stage of the lunar module, which in a sense also relates to number 10 in my top 10 list. Just because you don't see an exhaust flame doesn't mean there isn't an exhaust or that it doesn't have an effect. Indeed, often back home what I do to demonstrate this is to consider using a Bunsen burner, which again many of you will have used in school, and you might have had experience of this yourself. If you're in a brightly lit room, it's sometimes quite difficult to see the flame of the Bunsen burner. So basically I think the waving flag is a real red herring. I think in the case of this one, the conspiracy theorists have just got it completely wrong because they've misunderstood the basic science. What do you think? Go away and have a think about it for yourself. But it does lead us on to maybe the next topic that's worth considering, which is the absence of stars in the photographs. Now what we see here is quite a famous bit of footage whereby one astronaut is filming his colleague as he jumps off the moon's surface, and then he sort of floats down. Well, float's really not the correct word in this context. He drops down, but in the lower gravity of the moon, so it takes him longer to accelerate towards the moon's surface than it would do if you were on the Earth. But the two things to note are that first of all, the flag is just perfectly still throughout all of that, and secondly, you don't see any stars in the photographs. The conspiracy theorists would challenge this absence of stars and say that that, in their view, is highly suspicious, because in the clarity of deep space, in the words of Bill Casing, one should be able to see the stars in the photographs. Well, is that really true? Now, the puzzling thing I find about all this is that Bart Sibrel is a photography expert, or he claims to be at any rate. So surely Bart Sibrel should realise that if you take a photograph on a moonlit night, it's pretty hard to see any stars. Here's a photograph taken in Tucson, Arizona, from an observatory near to there. Actually, Tucson, although it's a big city, the light pollution, as we call it, isn't too bad around there. Although there's a lot of street lights, most of the light doesn't shine up and illuminate the sky. That's good for astronomy. But actually the biggest source of light pollution in this photograph isn't the streetlights, it's the moon. And any professional astronomers know that the one time of the month when you don't want to go looking at faint stars or galaxies is when there's a full moon. The moon is just too bright by comparison. If you want to see the moon and the stars at the same time, what you need is a long exposure photograph. And here's one that I and my colleagues took down in Cornwall in the southwest of the UK. And you can see that the moon is elongated in shape. That's because we needed to take a long exposure in order to bring out the detail of the stars, which appear as little trails because during the photographic exposure, the Earth is actually turned a little bit.